This is TWiT.
Rene Ritchie is back from his mysterious briefings or something. Hello, Rene.
I brought toys, though.
By the way, Rene is not named Christina Warren. We're going to see your toys in a second. We're going to have to fix that. But
I wish. In my stress test, I basically took my iPhone review, which is 19 minutes of mixed footage. It's got 10-bit XF AVC. It's got Dolby Vision iPhone footage. It's got some 8K Canon in it. Just a bunch of gnarly codecs. And I output it to H.264 and I output it to ProRes. And it was just dropping at first because of the numbers. Like, it was just 4 times faster, I think, with H.264. Then with ProRes, it was 10 times faster, like literally 10 times faster. But the battery life on the Intel Max, because I tested 14 and 16 Intel and the 14 M1 and then the 14 M1 Max, the Intel boxes went down. They lost 75% battery life. They went down to 25% battery life, finishing all those renders. The M1 MacBook Pro from last year was down to 80%, and the M1 Max from this year was down to 90%, just because the ProRes was so fast on it.
So how many hours, if you're really working on that load, you're thinking maybe 6, 7?
5, 6 hours. Okay. Yeah, but that, again, like I'm never going to be rendering like for that long.
Yeah, that's
so it's going to be a
working
workload.
really hard. I'd be afraid of it.
So I figure
breaking.
like 6 hours, 6 to 8 hours, normal. Like, and that's full speed use too, because like the PC laptops famously, if you have a big GPU in it, when you unplug them, they go down to 1/4 power. So like you can't even race to sleep on them.
And for the work a lot of other people do, like me, I'm in coding and things like that. I think honestly the Pro is fine. You know, you don't need it unless you're doing that kind of graphics work or video rendering or video playback, that kind of thing, right? That's kind of my general
3D is silly
impression.
too.
3D, yeah.
I got to see Octane and Cinema 4D tests. Like it sounds so dumb. I likened this to when the wedge-shaped MacBook Air came out, when it redefined what your expectations were from an ultra portable. This to me is redefining what my expectations are from a Pro laptop, because it's literally doing what it took a medium to high-end Mac Pro to do just 2 years ago. But like you see a lot of, like I was watching Tyler Stallman's video and he's doing 7 streams of 8K with a really bad, I think R5 codec. I mean bad by like the gnarly codec, while he's editing in Lightroom, while he's running like a bunch of other applications, and it's the playback is going, not skipping a frame.
Yeah.
And you see people
nobody's
like,
going to do that
on
though.
Octane.
So it's nice, it's impressive, but honestly, nobody's going to do that.
But you couldn't do that. The point is that you couldn't do that on a laptop before. You had to do that on a Mac Pro. And people putting everything on an Octane and spinning it around in real time, and you forget what real time is like until it's suddenly given back to you. And then you look at it as a laptop, and it's like, I can work anywhere now.
And a lot of the stuff, I mean, one of the things we're seeing a lot of performance on is USDZ as well, which is something I'm spending a lot of time using right now. And that makes a big difference as you look at where Apple's going in the future, and being able to open a really high-end model in preview. Like literally, I'm opening this in Apple's preview. I just double-click on the model, and boom, it's open. You know, I'm able to rotate it around and look at it, and it's photoreal, and you definitely see the performance change when you switch over to the M1s, even the little M1s that I have.
So let's step back a little bit, and since you've got one in hand, Rene, talk about it's the weight, the size, the appearance. Gruber said it feels kind of retro, like a titanium.
It is so retro.
Yeah.
It's like a power book. It's like a love letter to power books. It's got that whole vibe about it. And it's even got like this little artistic statement on the back.
They etch it in instead of...
Yeah.
They also took the labeling off on the screen, which is great. So it's just etched into the bottom now that says MacBook Pro.
They took away and they gave you a notch, which like it's kind of like in your face, but you stop noticing it after a few minutes too. But the screen is, if you've seen the iPad Pro screen, the screen is ridiculously good too. It's like full HDR, really bright, really vibrant.
I keep forgetting to be irate about the notch. I'm sorry. I think what happens is just forget about the notch after a while and live with it.
The menu bar leaves your screen and goes into the notch, and you have like a normal sized MacBook screen without having the menu bar.
Honestly,
on it, which is really nice.
You know, the stuff I work with full screen, like Emacs, probably I'll see the notch because it's kind of there. I'm using it full screen, but I would gladly trade the notch for full size function keys and an escape key that I can actually.
Well, also when you go full screen, you don't see the notch because it blacks out the top. The top is out of the 16:9 window for full screen.
Some programs put stuff kind of in the middle there, like that.
Oh, maybe
yeah. It's all right.
Yeah.
I'll survive.
We'll get over it.
I'll get over
I
it.
wish you could pin notes under the notch. Like, just let us pin our little notes under the notch. Then it'd be like a bulletin board. It'd be great.
Do you notice that it's a little heavier? What is it, a half a pound heavier?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like going back from Baby Yoda to full-size Yoda, like we used to have in 2015 and previously. But like at the 16-inch also, it's like 4 point something pounds, which is not insignificant. But I think like that's where you should differentiate. Apple's one of the biggest issues with the previous Pros is that Apple tried to make them like MacBook Pro Airs, which a lot of new generation, I'm flying everywhere. I'm a founder. I'm a coder. I want to use this thing on a Boeing 747. They love that. They bought those in droves. But the people who were traditional pros are like, no. That's a MacBook Air. I need an actual MacBook Pro, and that's what Apple's doing back here. They're not making the MacBook Pro have to be an Air anymore.
Yeah. How's the sound? How's the music?
It's like the 16-inch MacBook Pro Intel model from 2019 was ridiculously good for a laptop. Like I think industry leading still to this day. And this is just a little bit better. Like they've just made every component a little bit better in it. So it's like a little bit wider, a little bit more vibrant, a little bit better bass, a little brighter. I was watching just like as a demo when Georgia came in. Is that a laptop? She thought I was watching it on the TV surround system because it really is loud and it really sounds. I was watching the Eternals trailer because I'm into that sort of thing, and it sounds like you'd be fooled if you didn't know that it was a laptop.
Dwindle has, as we've been talking, received his 16-inch and is opening it and booting it, and I'm watching him in our chat room slowly go through the steps. He says, "Oh, I can't wait to try the speakers." He's waiting for Mac OS update to finish. You have an OS update immediately, huh? You already have. It comes with Monterey, but.
And I think Final Cut updated some of the components as well.
Maybe Xcode too.
When it started.
Yeah. What else? I'll ask our
There was some
Discord
controversy with the
anything?
HDMI and the SD card because the HDMI is HDMI 2.0, not 2.1, and the SD card is UHS 2, not 3. And when you look at the schematics, though,
2 is pretty fast, right?
Yeah, except some people are like, this is a Mac, it's got to have the best of everything. But when you look at the schematic, it's got 3 Thunderbolt buses now, 3 USB buses, up from 2 previously, and there's just no bandwidth left. Like they'd have to add another bus to get bandwidth to make. And the benefits are uncertain because HDMI 2.1 is great, but it's like 8K, 120 hertz, variable rate HDR, great, and you're not outputting that. Like Apple, like the Mac can't output that right now, so it's a bit of a balancing act.
I'm just so glad that I'm eager to hand it off to Rene, but all I really have to say is that thank goodness that Apple is reclaiming the Pro designation and making it really mean something. Just like you said earlier, was it you or Rene who said that there used to be just such an overlap between the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air even before the transition to M1 last year, and now it's like no, if you walk in with $1,500, $2,000 to spend on a Mac, there are people who will come out with a MacBook Air and $800 more in their pocket. There are people who will come out with a MacBook Pro and spend $800 more than they wanted to spend, but because they saw exactly the machine that they needed, not one that, not like last year when I thought that, I'll buy the MacBook Pro, but only because I want the extra storage and I want the cooling fans, and that was the only reason why I bought the Pro instead of the Air.
John Gruber nailed it in his review of the MacBook Pro. He explained it. Now that I think about it, he's absolutely right. Apple uses Pro 2 different ways. So when you talk about the AirPods Pro means something, he says, more like nicer or deluxe. A couth euphemism for premium, writes John. Yeah. And the Touch Bar MacBook Pros were undeniably nice, so they were Pro in that context. But Apple, he says, has revisited what the Pro and MacBook Pro means. It means professional. And this is Apple kind of retrenching from, it's premium to professionals. I guess the MacBook Pro 13-inch that I bought is really the premium version of Pro. But there is no question, these are professionals.
And you saw that in the messaging as well. So when you looked at the keynote, they're really talking about it as a pro. They're talking about pro apps, doing pro things. And I think that for a lot of folks, I think what's exciting for Mac users is for a long time, maybe the last decade, we've been like, it's not as fast, but we really like the operating system and the inconvenience of it and everything else. I mean, if we want real power, we know we have to go somewhere else. But we really like the operating system, and Apple is now giving us both. And I think that's going to be really exciting. For next year too.
120 hertz refresh rate. Looks pretty good.
Yeah, Andre had a quibble with it. Like he put it under a high-speed camera, turned on dark mode, and then started moving it back and forth. He said it doesn't refresh as fast as he wants it to. I haven't been able to reproduce that, but that's very personal. Like some people can see dropped frames at 120 frames per second. I cannot. I can see colors where other people don't care about differences in colors. So that's gonna be very personal. But like you can nitpick. If you find a display technology, I can tell you how to hurt it. So it just depends on how you want to hurt your particular display technology.
Also, he does point out, Andre points out again in OnTech, not all apps use 60 hertz. So a number of people are complaining about Twitter, but use 120 hertz. But Twitter's still back at 16 hertz. And so that's
the more you use like the native stuff, the more you'll benefit from this. The more that you've done custom stuff, is more it's going to take them time to update that custom stuff.
And this is a shot across the bow for most developers. Is you just have to use the libraries that they're handing you because we're an the territory now is all Apple's. Like it really is something that if you're going to try to write your own, you're now. I've seen in the last like audio right now is just a disaster. On M1 and in Monterey because the plugin manufacturers have all these creative ways that they have done this stuff for the last decade or more, and now trying to keep up, they can't get it out. They can't get the new updates out because they're not able to keep up with it. So you really have to rely on Apple's, which for better or for worse, now that things are starting to accelerate, you have to rely on Apple's libraries or you're going to have trouble keeping up.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, to button what Alex was saying. Yeah, that's it. That's always been one of Apple's many problems with dealing with developers. They'll often say you are required to use this library, but then when they say, well, this library is completely inadequate for what my what my app does, they will say tough darts, which is bad enough. But then they will say, well, how come my competitor or how come this other app gets to use it? So, well, we've given them an exclusion, exception that you're not entitled to. Well, why am I not entitled to that? And then radio silence. And this is why there's a lot of bad blood between Apple and developers. They're requiring them to use tools that are inadequate for purpose and not really explaining why they're applying this not unfairly across different developers.
Well, and I think that what I'm talking about specifically is not so much requirements as, the developers can write their own solutions for some of these things, but they're just going to get crushed by the folks that are sitting on top of the libraries that Apple makes because Apple is, they're just making all of those super efficient. People who ignored the Metal, and Apple and WWDC was talking about Metal for years, going, you really want to move over, like this is not, and they kept that gave them lots of time to think about it, and the folks that ignored that are really paying the price now.
Yeah. So related to that also is single-threaded versus multi-threaded. And in fact, according to Anand, to Andre Frumusano, who wrote the article, the single-threaded performance is not massively changed from the M1. But on the other hand...
same cores. Same
cores. But on the other hand, let me give you his quote from the next page. The multi-threaded performance, a real monster. So that means you really want to use apps that are written using Apple libraries, written native to the hardware, and are multi-threaded if possible, if they need to be. I mean, obviously my Emacs doesn't need to be multi-threaded, but...
This will be the best or worst for everybody. Like what Apple's done here is also made a single target for developers. Like before, developers had to worry about like I have to write to the CPU, I have to write to what could be like in the PC world, what could be an AMD or NVIDIA or Iris Pro or like whatever different kinds of graphics. They had to handle all of this. Right now, like if you're starting to write for and your target is Apple Silicon, you're writing for one thing. Like Metal will handle anything GPU related. All the different programming frameworks will handle all of that. You're just writing your code. It means that code is much more dependent on everything that Apple's doing, but you have a much smaller job to do if you want to write highly optimized code that works really well with Apple's customer base.
Yeah.
And it does put companies that are trying to write cross-platform, it does put them at a disadvantage. Like it's just harder for them to do this because they have a bunch of libraries.
Buying a tailored suit versus off the rack, if you...
Or supporting a console versus supporting a PC. Like if you want to write for an X... Like it's basically an X... Like if we look at the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, those are AMD SoCs. A lot of products are moving in that direction because they don't have all the benefits, they have massive trade-offs, but they do have some tangible benefits.
Yeah. So ideally, you're going to use software. I have to say, I've been very impressed over the year that I've been using the M1. I don't have any more Intel processes running, Does Rosetta 2 benefit on these newer chips in any way?
You have the same x86 reorder sequencing for optimizing the translation layer, and if you wrote for Metal, you get all of that GPU performance. So there's still going to be apps that paradoxically work better on like through emulation on M1 than they did natively, just because they're writing for Metal, and Metal is so much more accelerated. And then you have like those 8 performance cores versus the 4 performance cores on M1. So just anything that's multi-core aware is going to be faster.
And what is impressive in all the benchmarks, and I hate benchmarks because they're so synthetic, but what is impressive is that in many cases, these machines are running as well as the very best top-of-the-line desktop machines with no power constraints. So
and even on battery,
again, we can't. I'm sorry. Go ahead. We really can't underscore that enough. That this is what it can do when you're still limited by die size, you're still limited by thermals, you're still limited by powers. That this is why, like I'm resisting the urge to like saying, but we have money for one of these new laptops. And remember, last year's laptop was more of a MacBook Air. Like, no, wait, we're as impressive as this year's going to be. If you want a Mac Mini, you are going to get the Mini with a capital M. It's going to be so powerful.
Really interesting explanation in the review where he talks about Apple being forced to use Intel's motherboard graphics, their highest end Iris motherboard graphics, but really keeping that a lid on what Apple could do with the GPU. That has all changed. And so things have, that is, he says, arguably the star of the show for Apple's Mac SoCs is the GPU.
Because they keep on adding so many cores.
Well, we were worried about discrete GPU, missing a discrete GPU. Iris was never quite enough for what Apple would like to do. For their largest 15, 16-inch MacBook Pros, Apple has been able to turn to discrete GPUs to make up the difference, but the lack of space and power for a GPU in the 13-inch MacBook Pro form factor has been a bit more constraining. However, now, because the GPU is a part of the SoC, those constraints are effectively gone.
And in a laptop, it's an implementation detail. Like in a big desktop tower, you're going to maybe want to take the GPU out, put a new GPU in, but no one's really swapping GPUs in a laptop. It's not. Right. It's not feasible. Yeah. So
well, I remember we bought that
when
I bought that 16-incher. I bought the eGPU unit, the little tower thing, and that I guess made some difference. But this is going to be ideal, obviously.
Yeah, also, it's going to be more important for homogeneous computing. That this is everything that Apple is able to achieve on the iPhone is now spreading across not just Macs but also again Pixel phones, it's other desktops, other laptops. The idea that you have all these GPUs, you have all these other core components on the die that aren't just there to say, oh well, GPU, well that's going to be great for graphics performance. No, because they're going to be throwing so much like artificial intelligence stuff on the GPU, so many other calculations on the GPU. It really is. This is why the benchmarks aren't really terribly useful. You really need somebody who's going to tear it apart and say, here's what an app does in 2021, 2022, and here is how it's going to use the stuff that you see on the CPU. Because by the time you get a number, and an independent lab can prove that this number is higher than this other number, but it doesn't really affect how fast is it going to take for you to take a picture, how fast it's going to take for you to compile an app.
And that takes us to the biggest difference between, as I mentioned, the Pro and the Max is GPU. The M1 Pro has half the GPU clusters, half system-level cache, half of memory bandwidth. But aside from those three things, in every other respect is the same. So that makes it a smaller chip, easier to make, less expensive.
So you can get bin down versions on the 14. Like if you want to save some money and you don't think you'll be needing all the cores, you can get like the 24-core GPU and the 8-core CPU to save a little bit extra cash.
Right. Yeah. So I spent the minimum amount of money, $2,000, to get this, which is still
the cheap one. In fact, no air conditioning in the factory stereo.
I paid, Leo.
I know it's still expensive, but it's not out of the reach of kind of a high-end Intel laptop. It's
spec out a high-end Dell sometime, and it recalibrates how expensive you think Apple is.
And I often do buy those i7-based Dells with lots of RAM and lots of storage, and they're $2,000 or Lenovo's. It's not out of the question at all. So it's kind of in there. And good news, Apple still offers the MacBook Air you could still get $1,000 laptop. So there's now a really nice range, and we're just waiting for this next level of high end stuff to come along. What else? What else should we talk about? Yes, there's still a headphone jack.
They fixed the camera.
The camera. How do you like that?
High impedance headphone jack.
Yeah.
The camera is really, really good. I spoiler alert. I did a Mac OS Monterey review with a friend of the show, John Gruber, and I'm on my camera like you see me now, and he's on the MacBook Pro camera, and he looks terrific. Like, we could literally not have done that. He'd have to have used it. Like, previously, the last time he used his iPhone to record it because the Mac camera was nowhere nearly good enough. And it looks really good because you're getting essentially a 1080p camera like the new iMac. It's got a much bigger sensor, and it's got basically the iPhone 12 image signal processor layered on top of that for white balance and color grading and all of those things. So it spits out a completely, and this is not damning with faint praise, but like, it spits out a very competent image that you could use for Zoom, for FaceTime, for all of these things.
Where is that? Where is that video? I want to show it. Is it on your YouTube?
It's not up yet. I'm still editing.
It's not up yet.
We're going to do a quick 15 minutes chat, and like an hour later, I'm still editing.
Yeah.
Are you doing any? What I'd love to see is a head-to-head with it in a Brio. Logitech Brio.
I have. So in my review, I have the Brio, I have the Logitech 920, I have most of their previous MacBook Pros.
And how did you?
As if you've doubted.
But yeah,
it's night and day. I mean, like, you can see the camera's getting better with the M1, with the MacBook, the iMac Pro from 2017, because that was 1080p, and then the iMac camera is even better than that, and then this is just better than any camera they've had before.
Yeah.
And how would you compare it to the Brio?
I like the color better. Like, I find the Brio's color a little odd. Like, Logitech has always been a little warm and rosy for me, like a little magenta shifted for me.
Yep.
I think Apple does a better job on the colors, but Apple tends to show everything. So like the Brio looks a little bit more natural in terms of darks and lights, where Apple exposes more of the shadows, which some people hate.
What do you think of the resolution? Does it feel like it's, because the Brio is coming 4K down to 1080?
Yes. No, it looks really good because, again, you've got the silicon behind it. I would use this over
Here's
a Brio,
the video in your Pro review. Here's the 1080p video. It does look good.
Yeah.
That's the old one.
I did not include the 480p versions from the earlier laptops.
Okay. So this is fun. You're going back. This is actually great. Comparing head to head. Really, actually, that's the best one, the iMac, right? That was the 2020 iMac.
That was
pretty
the old,
good.
yeah, that was the old.
Yeah. So you got them all. Here's a 720p from the 2020 M1. Yeah. Gosh, that's terrible.
To finish off again, there's a Logitech 920.
Yeah.
I bet that
there's the Brio. Yeah, you're right. The Brio is a little rosy. Yeah.
Well,
it's always been a little red, a little magenta for me.
I mean, one of the issues that we have is that. Yeah, I mean, the problem is can you adjust the color? Like, so with the tools that we use to adjust the Brio, if we turn those on, we can't see the Mac. The security goes on, and we can't. The Mac, literally, the camera turns off. The internal camera.
All that really matters, frankly, because you're not going to use this for making your next feature film, is that you look okay in a Zoom call, and that's clearly you do.
Yeah.
I imagine that the department that's in charge of internal cameras got a whole bunch of more money, a whole bunch of more time last year, because I would love to see the timeline of the design of this machine when they decided, okay, guess what? We're now going to make sure that the adequate is no longer adequate. Now it has to be exceptional, because people, not because we thought that 720p was a really great solution, but because now people are going to notice this. This is going to be a differentiator between our laptop and
now
other
they're
laptops.
on camera.
Well, and also FaceTime is more and more important to Apple. I mean, I think FaceTime has really come into its own in the last
or just how they.
Leo. It's not out yet. But it's out for the iOS. For iOS, you can do FaceTime with spatial audio now. It's not out for the Mac yet, but I got to try a demo. It sounds really good. Like, it would be like Alex is over here and Andy's over here and Leo's there, and it makes it much easier to figure out who's talking as well, because they're naturally where you position them. And this computer is great for that because it's got the spatial audio speakers and it's got the FaceTime, the much higher quality camera. So you're getting more of like a virtual conference room, if that makes sense.
Nice. Well, that's great.
Yeah, and I think it is important that the camera looks good, because in meetings, what's happened is that we went from being informal to the fact that we're having lots and lots of meetings. People are working from home; they're not going back. It's not going to, we're not going back to the before times. And if you look and sound better in a meeting, it changes the level of authority you have. So for executives who are using these laptops, being able to open it up and look better is not just something that is just okay isn't okay anymore.
Yeah.
For a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, pros, good news. You finally got some hardware worthy of the name from Apple. How do you like the black background keyboard, by the way? Some people are not liking that.
I have mixed feelings on it. Like, it looks really nice, but I do worry that for people who have lower vision, it's going to be a little bit less contrasty.
Harder to see.
Harder to pick out the individual characters.
The keycaps are lit, though. I kind of like it.
Yeah, except for the Touch ID.
Okay. Yeah. There's a Touch ID in the upper right-hand corner. It just looks like a blank key. Look at the size of that escape key. God bless you. All the Vim users in the world are going, thank you, Apple. Thank you.
It actually feels like they're being a little petulant. It's like, fine,
Okay.
we're not going to give you your damn escape key back. We're going to give you one so big. There wasn't even a room for a 1 key because we made your escape key so big. Now just use it lowercase L, just like on an old typewriter if you want to use the number 1.
Great playback with ProRes RAW. Apple now really ProRes is finally in the iPhone. It just came out. We'll talk about that. Apple's really
DaVinci Resolve too, not just Final Cut. Like DaVinci Resolve is amazing with the M1s.
Everybody's doubling down. I think this is. Alex, do you think ProRes is going to become? I mean, obviously it's still a proprietary format, but is it going to become the default format, Alex?
It's a pretty popular format right now. Generally when we're working with folks and we say we want ProRes, that's what almost everybody that we work with wants at this point. It's ProRes or DNX are the ones that we get the most, and so ProRes is probably one of the most popular formats already when it comes to post production, and so I think it's already doing well. But with an accelerator and the ability to do all of this, I think it's really for media professionals. It's going to be hard to, like, especially if you're going on the road. If you're a reporter or you're doing, stuff for YouTube or doing other things like that, and you're on the road a lot doing work, it's going to be really hard to buy anything other than this computer because those render times that Rene is showing, and other people are showing, that's not like just more convenient. This is like I gathered something, and especially now that you really could do news gathering with an iPhone and this computer, and really turn it around fast, where you're able to, gather something in Apple ProRes on your phone with a great camera, put it on the computer, edit it down, and export it really, really fast. And so, I think the one soft point there is the amount of time it takes to get from the phone to the computer, which is the limitation of the Lightning connection. So I think that's going to be something that as we move towards pro models, quote unquote, pro models of phones, I think that transport has to get a lot faster.
Yeah. There's no throttling in this, right? I mean, one of the problems with the 16-inch i9, as you may remember, the YouTuber who put it in a freezer, was that you just never, and I think this is true of all Intel laptops, you really never get to see the full benefit of that. You don't see.
Intel changed their marketing definition to account for that. They changed what turbo basically meant on the Intel computer to account for that.
And I should, by the way, I should point out, I saw some early benchmarks from of the Alder Lake, which is the next Intel mobile platform coming out next year, and I was surprised. I don't think it's time yet. WCC Tech had this. I don't think it's time yet to call it CCF Tech, to call it for Apple, that Intel, and this is good, by the way, Intel has said,
too.
And AMD, okay, what can we do here? And so that's pretty encouraging, the early benchmarks from WCCF Tech for, I don't know how they got all their benchmarks, and it is very early, but it looks pretty good.
It does look good. The question,
the big difference with sorry, Alex.
Go ahead, Alex, and then we'll.
All I was going to say is that the hard part is that Intel is in a mature platform, and Apple is in a new platform, and so it's one thing for Intel to keep up with the first update. The question really will be, and we won't know this for another year, can they keep up with update number? The next fall and the fall after 2022, 2023 is where we're going to see whether Apple can continue at this pace. If they do, then you have laptops that are faster than enterprise.
Yeah.
And the incentives are different too. Like Intel and AMD, their bread and butter really is servers. That's where they make most of their money. They're enterprise clients, and they continually work to bring that. That's what pays for their technology, and they work to bring that down into smaller and smaller form factors. And they can't get into mobile. Like that's just a brick wall for them. And laptops is iffy sometimes. Where Apple is the opposite. Like the iPhone is our bread and butter. They live in small thermal envelopes, and so scaling to them is like, oh, we have room to breathe now. And their question is, can they scale up to this? Like probably can't scale up to like server side, like Xeons and the big AMD Athlons, all those chips. Maybe, like, who knows? But they're going to live in laptops for a while. I think it's going to be desktops. It's going to go back and forth, I think, a lot. But I think laptops are going to favor Apple for a while still.
Except for gaming, right? Still not quite the gaming platform.
I still think Apple has to build some kind of
engine.
Well, they have to. No, I don't think they have to build an engine. I think they have to build a game. They put the money into it. Like $100 million into a game that really takes full advantage of the platform. That is really competitive. I mean, they just have to put it all in. I think that Apple Arcade gives them the data that they probably need and their understanding of the game industry to some degree to figure that out. But I think that some kind of big game that is heavily graphics laden and really pushes beyond what. That what we've seen with other games and then runs across, of course, all the platforms. Right. I think is something that is very hard to do, but I think that if Apple could crack that, they could probably.
If they started 3 years ago, we should see it any day now. It takes a while.
Right. Just paid studios a fortune to port. Microsoft would solve it with money.
I don't think it has to.
Studios a fortune to port.
I think that the fundamental opportunity for Apple is to build something a little simpler, to be honest. I think that there's a market that's, the casual game market is bigger than most of these other game markets. But I think that there are, one of the problems with a lot of these games is that you really have to play them a lot to get to understand what's going on. And so I think that,
they're for
even
serious
game
gamers.
Companies.
But you don't do that for the same reason you do it for video editors, because those people are influential to other people. You're right. It's a smaller market.
But I think that you could build something that scales. I mean, when one of the reasons that we play, we watch soccer or we watch football or we watch baseball is that those games are actually pretty simple to understand what's actually happening. We just don't see video games like that, or not very many of them that are really aggressive aggressive as far as how the graphics look. As soon as they start getting aggressive with the graphics, what we end up with is a really complex game that you really have to be a gamer to understand. And I think that Apple has the opportunity to do something probably a little bit more straightforward. I don't know if they will, but I think that's where the soft point in the market is.
Games like Final Fantasy with a low barrier to entry. There's games.
I find that's still a gamer's game.
Zelda.
I mean, it's not a mass game. It's a mass gamer's game. Final Fantasy, but it's not like, I think that something more arena based would be better.
Yeah. Well, especially now that streaming platforms are becoming more serious. It's like, so long as Apple just aggressively makes sure that whatever platform is going to be streaming games, we will support it aggressively. They can solve a lot of the problems that they're already having. I'm not sure if it's worthwhile for them to do all of the sweat equity that would be required to turn the Mac into a desirable AAA game platform. I'm not even sure if they can at this point.
Right.